Today on the Cameron Journal podcast, we are joined by Andrew Serra. He is the author of, and I've got it here, Hell's Hundred Acres. And it is a historical novel about the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory, which burnt down in 1911 and killed a bunch of people because the exits were closed. There were no stairs. It was a terrible situation. It was a huge turning point in American labor rights and in the textile industry and in how buildings are designed and fires are fought and all this sort of thing, which people kind of forget. That's all relatively new technology. We didn't know that for a long time ago. So I'm excited to hear about this. I love historical fiction. I write a lot of historical fiction. This will be fun. Welcome, Andrew, to the Cameron Journal podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. All right. Well, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your book, and we'll start from there.
Uh, I write, historical novels is definitely a genre I enjoy writing in. My professional background, about a little over a year ago, I retired from the New York City Fire Department, where I spent 25 years. So that definitely ties into this story because the Triangle Factory, the building, which is still there, is in the neighborhood where I used to work, and the firehouse that I write about in this story is the firehouse that I worked in. So I try to tie my experiences together, and I was able to learn a lot just from observing from the time I worked there about the neighborhood and the building in particular, and the history of this fire.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, how was the how for me, historical fiction, the research is the fun part. So, how was the research for you?
It moved, it sometimes it can feel daunting when you start a subject. You wonder how hard it is going to be to find the little details that fill out the story and all. But I have to say, for this project, the research really, it's much more recent than some of the other things I've written about. So I think it's much more in the collective memory. There's a lot of written sources out there, a lot of documentaries about this, other books, some great books written about it, and even some survivors' relatives and responders' relatives I was able to track down. So it was, you know, it wasn't as bad as I feared it might have been heading, starting out.
No, that's absolutely fascinating. And obviously there's been a lot written on this, so that makes, it easy. But why don't we dive into the expertise end of things from a firefighting perspective? What went wrong?
I think the, it was the maybe industrialization and building construction outpaced firefighting technology at the time. I think buildings were being built taller and taller, and fire safety was always an afterthought in these things. The New York City chief of department of the fire department at the time, a man named Edward Croker, was actually very forward thinking, and he actually had fought for a lot of things that would have helped at this fire ahead of time. He wanted fire inspectors, which he was always, he was always fighting an uphill battle to get funding, to get approval, to get, he was fighting against the factory owners who didn't want to be bothered with anything like that. He wanted sprinklers in factories, something that the state legislature, the city council, and the building owners fought him on. One thing he was able to enact ahead of time in the decade leading up to this was a high pressure water system in Lower Manhattan because of these tall factory buildings. And he was able to have the city build a massive water main that cut across the lower part of Manhattan that supplied high pressure water to this area. And from an actual firefighting point of view, one of the ironies of this, the sad ironies of this fire is from the moment the firefighters arrived on scene, the fire actually went out fairly quickly for the amount of fire that there was. From, I think, receipt of the alarm until the fire was extinguished was less than 18 minutes. They had water pressure up on the upper floors. They were able to put it out, but it was just sadly too late for all the workers who had been trapped up there with no way out.
Yeah, I mean yes, and I mean that's why, there's all those very romantic fire escapes on the back of old buildings. Those actually did serve a purpose one time, you
Yes, for
know. other than just, as an extra place to keep your cooler in the cold weather, or to catch some fresh air in the summer. Those actually had a job. Um,
And in tenements, they were a good thing. They were in the 19th century. They saved a lot of lives. Building owners fought that also, putting fire escapes. They thought they looked ugly on the front of buildings. Now people love them. They kind of look charming. But
yeah.
building owners fought tooth and nail against them. And the fire department in the 19th century and some politicians were able to get fire escapes required on tenement buildings, which was a good thing. I think another irony of this case is in this building, the fire escapes actually worked against them. When the building was being built and city inspectors had looked at it, they knew it was big open floor space. It was 10 stories, and they knew it was going to have a high occupancy rate of workers on these floors, hundreds and hundreds of workers on these upper floors. And there were
Mm.
two stairways built at the time, and the city wanted three. So the building owner had to come up with some kind of compromise in order to be approved to finish the building. So what he did was he very hastily, late in the project, put a fire escape on the back of this building, a 10-story fire escape. And it was too narrow for its needs, and it was not really secured the right way. And the building had iron shutters, which was required, but then that interfered with the fire escape. And the fire escape ended up collapsing early on in the fire and killing people early on and cutting off another vital exit where people could have gotten out. So in this case, the fire escape probably worked against people because had they not put one on, they would have been required somehow to put a third staircase somewhere.
Yeah, one of the delightful I don't see them here in the East as much, or I've not heard about them here in the East as much, but out west in schools they used to have tubes out
Really?
of classrooms, and if there was a fire, you would look. It's like a giant slide, and people would
Right.
get it and you slide out the bottom, sort of thing. Um, I have not seen any of those around here, but like my grandma's high school in Ray, Colorado had one of those, and I'm like, well, that's a fire escape that's also fun. Like I feel
Right.
like
I would
this
think when
could
a
be a
fire drill comes
sales
in, your kids would
tactic.
have to, fight to see who gets up front,
Exactly, exactly. I'm like, see, now that's fun. We could add an element of fun to the fire escape. But so let's talk about writing process. How was it writing this? Did you meticulously outline and plan, or did you just write it as it came?
I kind of wrote it as it came. I mean, an event like this, obviously, everyone you know where the story's going. It's this event, this tragic fire, which is the closing sections of the book. But I wanted to build the lead up to it. I wanted to really hone in on the lives that came together on this tragic day. So I tried to build a world around a handful of characters that, for the reader to get to know, to kind of see it through their eyes and what was going on in their lives at the time.
Yeah.
Because 146 people ended up dying, but it sounds like a statistic, right? But when you think about it, it's 146 lives, full lives that with histories, with loved ones, with families, many of whom had escaped terrible conditions in their old countries. They were recent immigrants, so there was a lot. They all had stories to tell, and I tried to just pick a handful and focus on them.
Yeah. What was the most shocking thing you learned while researching this?
Um, you know, I think a couple of things come to mind. The owners going into it, it's very easy to just create like cartoon villains of them. It was a partnership of Isaac, uh, Max Blank and Isaac Harris were their names. They were business partners, very successful garment factory owners at the time. And anyone who's heard this story, growing up, you heard the story of it. They were greedy. They locked the exits. They didn't want women stealing or leaving early, so they locked them in, and they were evil, and that's it. And they definitely deserved the blame that they've gotten for their part in this tragedy. But I found, they had their own stories also. They were immigrants themselves. They started with nothing, and they built themselves up to this, worked in terrible sweatshop conditions themselves, younger. So it's almost fascinating how then they could just, I don't know if that played into how they felt, what they felt they were entitled to from their workers, or how they made the decisions they made later on. And, I found that to be an interesting part that I tried to explore a little bit, as opposed to just painting, the classic villains.
Yeah, well, maybe there was an aspect they figured it was, and it's kind of hard to think about this now because times have changed, but people forget at the time that was a normal sort of working conditions. It wasn't out of the ordinary. They could stand and say there are 10 other factories exactly like sort of thing. Everybody is doing this. What's out of the ordinary here?
Yeah,
They
believe
it
it,
yeah.
in a lot of ways, working at Triangle was seen as a step up in a lot of ways. We hear the term sweatshop a lot, and everyone says, "Oh, the Triangle Factory was a sweatshop," but it's almost it's not really a sweatshop in the true sense of the word. The word comes from the late 1800s, where a lot of small time, um, almost independent contractor garment factories sprung up in tenement buildings, in apartments. They would have 4 or 6 sewing machines in the parlor room of a tenement apartment, and workers, seamstresses, and foremen and errand boys would be in these cramped, dark apartments for 12, 15 hours a day. And they're called sweatshops. They were hot and sweaty, but really because of the type of financial arrangement that was set up, the owners of these small little production factories were basically independent contractors who they got paid by the garment by a larger umbrella company who bought them from them. And they in turn paid the seamstresses and the workers by the garment. So they were basically sweating out of them as much as they could in a day's pay. So that's where the term came from. So when factories like Triangle, uh, once building construction opened up, big loft factories are being built bigger and bigger, and a place like Triangle opened up, there were big windows with light and air and high ceilings, and it was spacious, and it was seen in a lot of ways as a step up, from prior working conditions.
No, no, and that is and it's kind of, and I think people don't realize, and I'm interested in your take on all of this. A lot of, moments like these, improvements in fire safety, all this type of thing, come with a body count. I had a friend years ago who was a civil engineer. He said, our entire profession is hard lessons. The bridge falls down, the building goes over, all this type of
And
thing.
just about all fire safety regulations come from tragedies. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think people forget like how much, like, even something like a Walmart, how much fire safety design and hard lessons are contained in what seems like a simple building, but
Right.
really isn't when
Yeah.
you get into all the stuff that goes into it. And it was things like Triangle Shirtwaist that allowed us to learn how to design for that sort of thing.
Yeah, for sure. A lot, there was, like I said, the Chief Croker at the time and some others, activists, and definitely the the garment workers unions at the time had been pushing for change in the years leading up to the fire. And they really were fighting an uphill battle in other ways. And it took this fire to really break the logjam, and a lot of laws were able to be passed because of the political pressure that came from the fire.
Absolutely. And yes, and I would be curious, kind of pivoting a little bit, because you mentioned staircases. I'd be curious, given your history in New York and all this sort of thing, and the variety of age of buildings in New York City. One of the big things in urbanism now is allowing single buildings with only one stairway, only one hallway sort of thing, like small apartment buildings, all this type of thing. And the urbanist crowd is like, oh my goodness, it'd be so great if we could build more of these. The whole double corridor thing is crazy. We're the only country that does this, and it messes up floor plans and all this type of thing. What's your take on that? Is it safe to build a 5-story apartment building with one stairwell, or is it
Well,
really a fire problem and we need two?
uh, I don't know the exact year. I want to say maybe maybe the law came into be about 50 years ago, but it takes time for new building constructions to start and projects to start. And we really only started seeing them within the last 25 years or so.
Right.
The building, I can speak in New York City. The codes are you either need a second for a multiple dwelling, which counts as any structure where more than two families live. So, if a private home with a small apartment in the back doesn't really count as a multiple dwelling, but anything more than two families, three families or more, counts as a multiple dwelling. And every unit in the multiple dwelling needs what they call a second means of egress. So the way your everyday entrance and exit, the front door, the hallway, and the stairs to your apartment would be your primary means of egress, and you would need a second means of egress normally. That was the law for 100 years, say, and most buildings dealt with this by putting a fire escape on the building.
Yeah.
Now they give building owners and construction companies the option. You can either have a second means of egress or you need a fireproof sprinklered stairwell.
Hmm.
So, fireproof meaning like enclosed with sheetrock where fire wouldn't spread out of the stairwell, and sprinklers in the stairwell, which, it's good that they're protecting that primary stairs inside, but personally, I don't think those two measures, if that's the route an owner chooses to go, alleviates the need for that second means of egress, either a fire escape or a secondary stairwell or something. Because if the fire is in the stairwell or smoke is in the stairwell, even with the sprinklers can stop a fire from spreading quickly or knock some of it down, but they don't usually fully extinguish a fire. And they create steam, and there's always still smoke, which can be just as dangerous as somebody trying to escape. So that stairwell is not necessarily safe just because it's fireproofed and sprinkled.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people mentioned that. That was kind of my feeling as well, is that, well, that's all fine and well until your one way out gets blocked. And then you
Right.
have people jumping out of windows, sort of thing, you
Yeah.
know. And that was, and and that's even, even in skyscrapers that can be, a problem. We all lived through 9/11. It was a terrible situation because all the, above a certain level, all the stairwells were blocked, and, it was a terrible tragedy ensues thereafter. And I think it's even, worse in a apartment building. We've got children and all this sort of thing. Then it becomes a double tragedy. So it's, but again, little slides off the building. It makes fire escapes fun.
Yeah.
So, um, so when it comes to tell us a little bit about the book. When do you start the story? And then we know where it ends with the fire, but at what point do you kind of start the story? During the building
Um,
construction, the day of the fire?
the
Give us a
main
little taste.
characters, we kind of joined the main characters a few months, or maybe a couple of months before the fire
Oh,
in
okay.
early 1911. Two main characters. There's Esther, who's a seamstress at the Triangle Factory, and Charlie, who's a brand new firefighter who just finished his training, and he
Hmm.
starts at the local firehouse down the block from the Triangle Factory.
Oh,
So.
okay.
And
Yeah.
then we come in, with some other characters and flashbacks for years prior for their backstories and, what led them to where they are at this point in their lives and their connection to the triangle, and try to tie it all together, leading to March 25th, 1911, when the day of the fire.
Yeah. Yeah. What got you into firefighting? I think that's an interesting story.
From a young age, I grew up in, working class family in, Staten Island, New York. A lot of cops and firemen, civil service, sanitation workers. It's definitely something. Half the people on your block were civil servants, and it was always always visible, something to do. And my mother, when I was graduating high school, her dad was a firefighter, so she said to me and my brothers, I'll support you, whatever you want to do in life, that's fine, but you're taking the test. You know, when the police test comes, the fire test, sanitation, when the tests come, you take the test. They'll call you a couple years from now. You can say no, you can live your own life, but you have to take the test. Okay, ma. So we signed up for the test, and I learning about the fire department and getting to know people who were on the job. It definitely seemed like the type of job that appealed to me. The professionalism, the dedication to the profession, and the camaraderie amongst the members was something, even as an outsider, I noticed, and I thought it was something worth trying, and I did, and never looked back.
No, I'm always amazed at how people get into such things. And I didn't know there was a test for that. That's fascinating.
A few years
So
to give a civil service exam for it.
oh, very, very
In
nice.
New York,
So did
every
any of the
state's a
siblings
little
end
bit
up in
different.
fire or sanitation? Who ended up where? Your sibling, your brothers, who ended up where?
Well, my youngest brother Rob, he became a firefighter also, and
No, okay.
my brother Joe, got in the restaurant trade, and he lives down in Florida now, so he went a different direction. So, but yeah, we all, you know,
Well, she got best two out of three, not too bad.
yeah, we all, I think, landed on our feet, the three of us, so, three boys.
No, that's good. I noticed the books in your background. I love, love, love the cover. Who did you have design that?
Well, the drawing of the front of the Triangle Factory, I enlisted the help of another firefighter from my firehouse. His name is Chris Burke. He's a graphic artist. He's a tattoo artist. Very talented. He always drew our artwork for stuff around the firehouse. He was the go-to guy for that. So when I knew I wanted a, kind of a unique design for the book cover, I called him up and, I'm so glad he drew the cover image and a number of interior illustrations for the book, which are beautiful. He really did a great job.
Yeah, no, it's quite striking. Yeah, it definitely stands out. What about writing the book most surprised you? And that can be story, it can be process, it can be a character, it can be a thing you found out. It's just one of the things I love about books is there's always that moment. I think anytime you're writing, there's that moment that sort of changes you or changes your perspective on it all. And it can be something that happens internally with the process, or it can be something in the story. But I think it's just always interesting to find out, what was the thing that was unexpected for you?
Well, going into writing about these characters, ahead of time, there's a couple of two in particular firefighters that I highlight in the book that are pretty main characters. The one I said, Charlie, is one of the main characters, and also Chief Croker, who plays a big
Mm.
part in the story. And I didn't imagine I would have too much trouble kind of, getting in their thought process to try and, build their characters out in the story. But I was a little worried for the main character, Esther, the seamstress, because, what looking at it as, someone living 100 years later, what would I have in common with Eastern European Jewish immigrant seamstress from the early 20th century? Uh, would I be able to do her story justice? And I
Mm.
was able to, read a lot of survivors' accounts of actual survivors from the fire, and really try to get into, the lives they led and the stories they had to tell. And I'll leave it to the reader to decide if I did it well, but I didn't find it, it wasn't a hard process for me to keep wanting to get back to her character and building her story out. And when I would finish a chapter about something else, all right, let's come back to Esther now and let's see what she's up to. And because I kind of write in that process of like, I know an end goal where the story's going, but sometimes I write with like, well, let's see where this chapter takes us. Where's our character going? What's going to happen to her here? Who's she going to meet? What's she going to say? And kind of let the character lead where the story's going. And I was, I guess, surprised a little bit that how I was. It wasn't as difficult as I thought it might have been to follow this character, even though it wasn't someone that I would have anything personally in common with, unlike the other characters. Say.
No, no, but I mean, that's quite a stretch. Did you always write, or did you start with this project? Like, what did you write
I've
before
always loved
this?
writing since I was a kid. I've been writing books for I guess over a decade now. My first historical novel came out in 2010. 2012, I believe. So, and I've had a couple of others along the way. And then at one point, I kind of put it off for a while because, I thought I would write about it. 9/11, being a firefighter, people will say, and knowing that I write, are you going to write about 9/11? And I never really thought I could. And it wasn't until 2000, I guess 2016, I started, and it wasn't until 2018 I was able to publish a memoir of my experiences on 9/11 because I think that took a little time to process, what I wanted to say and how I wanted to say it. So that was probably a little bit more difficult to get that process started. But I've, definitely come back to writing, over the years. It's something I enjoy the process of it. I definitely enjoy having done it, even though sometimes while you're doing it, it can feel, like work. But
No, don't feel bad. Emerson said it best. I do not like writing. I like having written. And everyone, when I says, "How's the writing going?" I do not like writing. I like having written. There is every famous author you know would feel exactly the same way. You're in great company. So. No, that's absolutely fascinating. I was thinking when you were talking about fire safety and all this type of thing. I used to be a building historian for this building in Greeley, and we had technology of 1905, the one of those giant asbestos fire doors sort of thing.
right,
Which could never be removed because of asbestos abatement, sort of thing. And heaven help us if it ever got damaged. But I was thinking about all the things that have been tried because the problem was the building was long and narrow. It was 2 stories in a small town, and so if a fire starts, it quickly becomes a flume sort of thing, and then it kind of becomes a self-perpetuating thing. And the fire door was meant to isolate the fire in one part of the building, kind of save half, sacrifice the other half, sort of thing.
right.
And I was thinking about all the different things that we do to try to stop fire, prevent fire, all this type of thing. What exactly started the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory? I don't remember if I ever knew.
The best guess most investigators ever come up with is one of the cutters. A cutter was a skilled laborer who basically, with the giant scissors, would take big stacks of fabrics and material, and they would cut the basic shapes so that the seamstresses could sew them.
Right.
Um, on the eighth floor, the factory took up the eighth, ninth, and 10th floor. So of this building, on the eighth floor at one of the cutter stations, they think one of the cutters was probably smoking and put either the match or the discarded cigarette butt in the trash bin. All the cutters' tables had trash bins underneath them where little scraps of fabric were discarded.
Yeah.
So definitely
And then
flammable.
the fibers go, and then the fight. Yeah, there it
And
goes.
they didn't have a whole lot of fire safety measures in place at Triangle, but ironically, no smoking was in place and pretty seriously enforced at the Triangle factory.
Well, yeah,
The
because
owners
with
themselves,
fibers, one false move and kaboom, as we found out.
exactly. So,
Yeah.
workers were always on guard. They were, fired on the spot if they were caught smoking. So, but they would try to sneak them in sometimes if the manager was off doing something else, or they didn't want to go outside for a break, so they would try to sneak it in at their station. And the I think the best guess of how it started was in a trash bin underneath the cutter's table with a cigarette, discarded
Yeah.
cigarette.
That's quite quite sophisticated. I mean, it's always something so simple and stupid. Like you hear these stories, it's always something so simple and silly, and just oversight and negligence of one person, and there kills 146 people. So that's difficult to live with for sure. So it's yes, well, this is all extremely fascinating. Let's talk little about the firefighter character you created. Is he based on someone who was there, or did you create him?
The two main characters, uh, Esther, the seamstress, and Charlie, the firefighter, are fictional characters that I created.
No, okay,
Kind of
okay.
like the composites of a lot of different stories to try to like personify what, you know, what all of the survivors and witnesses would have had in common. Most of the other characters are real people who I fictionalized for the story, but these two characters were my own creation. So Charlie, like you said, was a firefighter. I definitely drew on my own experiences of what it's like to be brand new in a firehouse. Basically, especially back then, they basically lived in the firehouse with these other, men, all men at that time, and so it was definitely a new world for him. And working in that area with the factory lofts was definitely a different type of firefighting than most other areas, even of New York City. So I tried to bring that into the story of how this unique area created its own set of problems. The term Hell's 100 Acres, the title of the book, comes from a fire commissioner from the 1950s, actually nicknamed this area of Manhattan, which today encompasses Soho, Tribeca, and a little bit of the Village. He nicknamed it Hell's 100 Acres because it was so full of these factory lofts, which by that time were many of them were abandoned, and they were very serious fire hazards. The
Yeah.
buildings themselves, a lot of very deadly fires took place from when they were built in the mid 19th century right through to the 20th century.
Yes, and as I recall, the building the Triangle Shirtwaist was in is now Loft Residences, isn't it?
No, it's a part of NYU. It's a school building for NYU.
Oh, well, what a fitting retrofit for it then.
Yeah,
So,
and they actually built
yeah,
a very beautiful memorial on the front of the building for the victims. And every
no,
year on,
that's
on the
yeah,
anniversary, they have a ceremony.
yeah, no, that's good. And how odd it must have been to work so close to that all those years.
Yeah, my company, I worked at the firehouse. Ladder 20 is the name of the company. They were one of the first units on the scene at the fire. So, just working there, I there was a lot of history of the fire. And one of they're almost f- the fire apparatus they had at the time was the tallest ladder in the city. It was 85 feet long, which is very tall. And but it only goes up to about the sixth floor of a building. So
Right.
very famously at this fire, with hundreds and hundreds of witnesses and photographers, they were raising this ladder for a victim up on the ninth floor, a woman hanging out, and the ladder only reached to the sixth floor, so it missed her by about 20 feet, and she ended up jumping for the ladder and falling to the ground. But so every year at the memorial service on March 25th, even right up to this day, the company Ladder 20 goes over there with their fire truck and puts the ladder up to the front of the building as a kind of a stark reminder to everyone. The modern ladders go much taller. They would make the eighth or ninth floor, but they put it up to the sixth floor to let everyone kind of get a visual of what these victims were faced with.
No, that's quite a haunting reminder. That's yes. I love there are so many little things like that in New York that I absolutely love. It's why I've always been trying to live there. I cannot afford to live in the city, but I try. I'm always trying. I'm always coming up with various and sundry ways to see how I can swing living in New York City. Because there's all such wonderful little things like that that are always um so amazing and so haunting and keep these memories and things alive. And it's a quite
For all
amazing
the
thing. As
rebuilding and construction New York goes under, there's still a lot of history everywhere you turn. Yeah.
No, that's one of the things I love about living in the East that is not true out West is everything is so much older. I mean, I grew up in Denver, which was founded in 1851, refounded because ironically there was a fire in 1850 burnt the whole town to the ground because it was all wood board buildings, nothing spectacular. One good spark and kaboom, whole town gone. So we moved to the other side of Cherry Creek and started up again in 1851. And well, it's like we're just gonna try that again, and sort of thing. And one of the, I mean, it's like I used to go sing karaoke in a bar in West Virginia that was founded in 1759. Um, in West Virginia, if George Washington or someone from the Civil War slept in a house one night, there's a sign outside, so and so slept here, sort of thing. And all that stuff that I just enjoy, and that one of the things I've enjoyed about the East is there's 200 extra years of history to experience, and every time I'm in New York, I'm always reminded of that because there's layers. I was kind of like, yeah, that's a ramshackle building you don't care about, but it's also been there for 300 years. It's like this was built when we still call this place New Amsterdam. Be respectful, sort of thing. And also the juxtaposition of new and old, especially in a place like Manhattan, you can go down several blocks and be in something incredibly new and modern, go over a little bit, and it's something amazingly historic. And
Right.
all in that's one of the most magical thing. Many older cities are like this. Paris is like that. London is like that. And with Paris, London tack on another 500 years, sometimes 1,000 years in the case of Paris. But I always absolutely love and enjoy that about it. And I can only imagine from a firefighter's perspective how complicated that must be fighting fires. Like, it's like, what's this
Yeah.
building made of? How many stairwells aren't they? How wide are they not? Sort of thing. It's always a surprise.
Yeah. And we have buildings, some of them from the early 1800s, apartment buildings, and many of them in original condition, so it's definitely a different tactic firefighting wise in buildings like that, as opposed to a modern high rise building or something like that.
Yeah, it was no, I was staying at a apartment above a grocery one time, and it was little tiny narrow Victorian staircases, and I'm looking around and being like, this is a fire trap. Like this all could go very wrong at any moment, sort of thing. And I was very happy it was a nail salon, not a restaurant downstairs, because I was like, oh no, this all could go very wrong at any moment, sort of thing. So absolutely, absolutely fascinating. Well, this is great. I'm so glad you've read this book. This is just amazing that you've done this and from someone so close to it and from the fire company that fought it and all this sort of thing. Absolutely amazing. So thank you for coming on the Cameron Journal podcast.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Oh, I forgot before I go. My goodness, I thanked you and forgot to ask you, where do we buy? I'm gonna have to redo the outro again. Where do we buy the book and where do we keep up with you online?
Oh, you can go to my website, andrewserra.com. The book is for sale. The links are on the website at barnesandnoble.com, Amazon, all the major outlets that can carry the book. And you can sign up for my newsletter at my website or on social media, Andrew Serra Author.
Excellent. Well, now I can thank you for coming on the Cameron Journal podcast.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
That's all for this episode of the Cameron Journal podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Visit us online at CameronJournal.com. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and I love to talk to my followers and listeners, so please feel free to get us on social media at Cameron Cowan on Twitter, and we'll see you next time on the Cameron Journal podcast.